The sound of a rifle shot pierced the stillness of the Montana night as Jackson Zimmerman watched the intruder's shadow dart across his barn. 3 months of missing supplies and mysterious noises had finally come to a head, and tonight he was determined to catch whoever had been helping themselves to his provisions. The year was 1876, and in Montana territory, a man protected what was his or risked losing everything. "Come out now and I won't shoot," Jackson called, his deep voice echoing through the moonlit farmyard. At 32, he'd survived the Civil War, cattle drives from Texas, and the harshest winters Montana could throw at him. His 6-foot frame remained solid as granite as he approached the stable door, rifle raised and ready. The only response was a clatter from inside, followed by what sounded like a gasp. Jackson pushed the barn door open with his boot, the hinges creaking in protest. The familiar smell of hay and horses greeted him as he squinted into the darkness. "I said come out," he demanded, striking a match and lighting the lantern that hung by the door. The warm glow illuminated the stable, revealing his 3 horses Buck, Thunder, and Daisy all watching him with mild curiosity from their stalls. Jackson moved deeper inside, his boots crunching on loose straw. He was about to check behind the grain barrels when a soft thud from the hayloft caught his attention. "Last chance," he warned, aiming the rifle upward. "Show yourself or the next shot won't be a warning." There was a moment of silence, then a small voice called down, "Please don't shoot." "I'm coming out." Jackson kept his rifle trained on the ladder as a figure slowly descended. In the lantern light, he watched as a woman emerged, her hands raised in surrender. She was too thin, with dark hair pulled back in a messy braid. Her clothes were worn and patched, her face smudged with dirt, but there was something in her eyes that made Jackson pause. They were bright with fear but also with defiance. "Who are you and what are you doing in my barn?" he demanded. "My name is Sophia Calloway," she replied, her voice stronger than her appearance would suggest. "I needed shelter. I didn't take much, just enough to survive." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "You've been living here for how long?" 2 weeks, she admitted. "I was planning to move on once the weather improved." Jackson lowered his rifle slightly, taking a closer look at the woman. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, and despite her disheveled state, there was a natural grace to her movements. More importantly, she didn't look like a threat, just someone who had fallen on hard times. "You could have asked for help," he said, his tone softening despite himself. "I've learned that asking for help can sometimes be more dangerous than stealing," she replied, a flicker of something dark passing across her face. Jackson considered his options. The proper thing would be to march her into Montana City and hand her over to Sheriff Mills for theft. But the temperature was dropping rapidly outside, and the woman looked like she hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. "Are you hungry?" he asked finally, surprise registered on her face. "Yes," she admitted after a moment's hesitation. "Come on then," he said, gesturing toward the door. "I've got stew on the stove." Sophia didn't move. "Is this a trick? Are you taking me to the sheriff?" Jackson sighed. "If I wanted to turn you in, I would have done it already. It's freezing out here, and I'm not in the habit of letting people starve on my property, even thieves." She seemed to weigh his words, then nodded slowly and followed him out of the barn, keeping a cautious distance between them. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure that Jackson had built with his own hands over the past 5 years. It was larger than what a single man needed, but he'd always planned for a family someday. That dream had grown distant with each passing year, but he'd continued to improve the place nonetheless. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting warm light across the wooden floors and furniture. Jackson hung his coat on a peg by the door and placed his rifle in the rack. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "I'll get you some food." Sophia perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. Her eyes darted around the room, assessing exits and potential weapons. The behavior wasn't lost on Jackson, who'd seen that same wariness in men who'd survived ambushes during the war. He ladled a generous portion of venison stew into a bowl and placed it in front of her along with a hunk of bread. "Eat," he said simply, taking the seat across from her, For a moment, she just stared at the food as though expecting it to vanish. Then hunger won out over suspicion, and she began to eat with restrained desperation, clearly trying not to appear too ravenous despite her obvious starvation. "When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Jackson asked, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Proper meal," she repeated between mouthfuls. "A few weeks, maybe," Jackson frowned. "What brings you to Montana territory? You don't sound like you're from around here." Sophia slowed her eating, caution returning to her features. "I came from Illinois, Chicago. That's a long way to travel alone." "I wasn't alone when I started," she said quietly, and something in her tone told Jackson not to press that particular point. "Do you have family waiting for you somewhere?" he asked instead. She shook her head. "No one's waiting for me." Jackson watched her eat for a few more minutes, weighing his next words carefully. "Look, it's late and there's a storm coming in. You can stay here tonight." Sophia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "In the house. There's a spare bedroom upstairs. It's clean and warm." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you offer that to a stranger who was stealing from you?" "Because it's 20 degrees outside and dropping," Jackson replied bluntly. "And because whatever else you might be, you're a woman alone with nowhere to go." "I'm not the type of man who'd throw you out to freeze." She studied him, searching for hidden intentions. "What do you want in return?" The question carried implications that made Jackson's jaw tighten. "Nothing. But if you're going to stay here, even for a night, I have two conditions. First, no more stealing. If you need something, you ask. Second, in the morning, you tell me the truth about why you're hiding in barns in the middle of winter in Montana territory." Sophia considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Those are fair terms. Good." Jackson stood and collected her empty bowl. "Finish your coffee. I'll show you where you can sleep." He led her upstairs to a hallway with 4 doors. Opening one, he revealed a modestly furnished bedroom with a quilt-covered bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. "There are clean towels and water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," he said. "I'll find you something to sleep in." Jackson disappeared into his own room and returned with a cotton shirt that would serve as a nightgown on her smaller frame. He handed it to her, along with a bar of soap. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the items. "This is unexpected kindness." "Get some rest, Miss Calloway," he replied. "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Jackson turned to leave but paused at the door. "One more thing, I sleep with my door open and I'm a light sleeper. The barn is where my livelihood lives, so I'd appreciate if you didn't take the horses or anything else and disappear into the night." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I don't know how to ride, Mr. Zimmerman, and I've never stolen anything in my life before the past few weeks." "Jackson," he corrected. "And I'm inclined to believe you, which is why you're in here and not the sheriff's cell. Good night." He closed the door behind him, listening for a moment to ensure she didn't immediately start searching the room for valuables. Instead, he heard the soft splash of water in the basin and the creak of floorboards as she moved about. Satisfied, he retreated to his own bedroom across the hall, leaving the door ajar as promised. Jackson lay awake longer than usual that night, his thoughts circling around the mysterious woman sleeping down the hall. There was more to her story than simple desperation. He'd seen enough trouble in his life to recognize when someone was running from something. The question was whether that trouble might follow her to his doorstep. In the morning, Jackson rose before dawn, as was his habit. He stoked the fire in the kitchen stove and put coffee on to boil before heading out to tend to the livestock. The storm had indeed arrived overnight, leaving several inches of fresh snow across the landscape. The cold bit at his exposed skin as he trudged to the barn. By the time he returned to the house an hour later, the smell of frying bacon greeted him. He stamped the snow from his boots and stepped inside to find Sophia standing at the stove, her hair now clean and neatly braided, wearing the same threadbare dress but with his shirt over it for warmth. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the skillet. "I thought I could at least make breakfast." "I don't mind at all," Jackson replied, hanging up his coat. "Coffee smells good too." "It's the least I could do after you didn't shoot me last night," she said, a hint of dry humor in her voice. Jackson couldn't help but smile as he sat at the table. "I'm generally against shooting people who aren't actively trying to kill me. Bad for business." "What business is that?" she asked, placing a plate in front of him. "Horses, mostly," he answered. "I breed and train them for the army and for private buyers. Do some cattle ranching too, but that's secondary." Sophia brought her own plate to the table and sat across from him. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Jackson finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "So," he said, setting down his fork. "I believe you owe me a story." Sophia's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "Yes, I suppose I do." She took a deep breath as if preparing herself. "I was married in Chicago. My husband was Richard Pembroke, a businessman with connections to the railroad. At least that's what he told everyone." She paused, and Jackson waited patiently for her to continue. "After we were married, I discovered his business wasn't entirely legitimate. He was involved with some dangerous men who wouldn't hesitate to kill over money or perceived slights. When I confronted him about it, She touched her cheek unconsciously, where Jackson now noticed the faint remnants of a bruise. "He showed me a side of himself I hadn't seen before." "He hurt you," Jackson stated rather than asked. Sophia nodded. "That became a regular occurrence. I tried to leave once, but he found me and made it clear that if I ever tried again, he wouldn't just hurt me, he'd kill me." Jackson's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, allowing her to tell her story at her own pace. 6 months ago, federal agents came to arrest him for fraud and other crimes. There was a confrontation. Richard was shot, but not before he killed one of the agents. Her voice had become detached, as if she were recounting events that had happened to someone else. "I was questioned, released, but Richard's associates blamed me. They believed I'd turned him in to save myself." "Did you?" Jackson asked. "No," she answered firmly. "But they didn't care about the truth. They only wanted someone to punish. I fled Chicago with what little money I had, changing my name back to Calloway, my maiden name. I've been moving west ever since, staying nowhere long enough to be found." "And your money ran out in Montana," Jackson concluded. "In Helena, actually. I worked there for a while cleaning at a hotel, but one of the guests was a man I recognized from Chicago. I left that night without collecting my wages." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and direct. "So now you know. I'm a widow with dangerous men looking for me, reduced to stealing hay and eggs to survive the winter." Jackson considered her story. It explained her caution, her distrust, and her desperate circumstances. It also presented him with a decision. "What will you do now?" he asked. Sophia shrugged slightly. "Move on, I suppose. Find work somewhere else. Keep heading west until I reach the coast if necessary. I still have California to try." "Or," Jackson said slowly, "you could stay here for a while." Surprise flickered across her face. "Stay? Why would you offer that?" "Because winter in Montana is no time for anyone to be traveling alone, especially not someone without experience in this territory," he explained. "And because I could use some help around here." "What kind of help?" "The kind that involves cooking meals better than I can manage, keeping the house in order while I'm working with the horses, and maybe learning to handle some of the lighter, stable work yourself." He leaned back in his chair. "I've been managing alone since I built this place, but there's always more work than time. I can offer you room and board, plus a small wage. In exchange, you work and you don't run off with my silverware." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I'm not a thief by nature, Mr. Zimmerman." "Jackson," he corrected again. "Jackson," she repeated, "and I know how to work. I kept house for my father after my mother died before I was married." "Then we have a deal?" he asked, extending his hand across the table. Sophia hesitated only briefly before taking it. Her hand was small but surprisingly strong in his grip. "Yes, we have a deal," Jackson nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, about your sleeping arrangements. I can stay in the spare room," she began, but Jackson shook his head. "That was only meant as temporary. It's little more than a closet with a bed." He stood up, gesturing for her to follow. "Come with me." Puzzled, Sophia trailed after him up the stairs and down the hallway to a door at the end that had remained closed the night before. Jackson opened it, revealing a spacious bedroom with a large 4-poster bed, a dresser with a mirror, a small writing desk, and windows on 2 walls that would allow for ample light during the day. "This is the master bedroom," he explained. "I built it thinking." He trailed off, then continued. "Anyway, I've been using one of the smaller rooms since it's just me. This one has sat empty except for the furniture." Sophia looked around the room, then back at Jackson with confusion. I don't understand. It's yours while you're here, he said simply. You need a proper place to stay, not just somewhere to sleep. A room with a door you can lock if you need to feel safe. Her eyes widened. But this is your room, should be your room. I can't take it. You can and you will, he insisted gently. Consider it part of our arrangement. I'm offering employment and safe harbor, not another situation where you need to be constantly afraid. Sophia walked slowly into the center of the room, turning to take it all in. Her fingers brushed the quilt on the bed, tested the firmness of the mattress. I haven't had a real room of my own since I left my father's house, she admitted quietly. Well, you have one now, Jackson said. At least until spring, or until you decide what you want to do next. She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw genuine emotion break through her careful composure, gratitude mingled with disbelief. Thank you, she said simply, the words carrying more weight than lengthy expressions of appreciation could have managed. Jackson nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. Take the day to settle in. Tomorrow we can discuss your duties more specifically. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. With that, he left her to explore her new space, retreating to the familiar territory of his stables, where horses made more sense than the complex emotions stirring in his chest. The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them could have anticipated. Sophia proved herself to be an excellent cook, transforming Jackson's simple provisions into meals that reminded him of his mother's cooking before the war. She attacked the accumulated dust and disorder of the house with determined efficiency. And by the end of the first week, the place was cleaner and more organized than it had been since Jackson built it. For his part, Jackson found himself oddly comforted by the presence of another person in the house. He'd grown so accustomed to solitude that he'd forgotten the simple pleasure of conversation over dinner, or the satisfaction of returning from a cold day's work to find a warm house and a hot meal waiting. As January gave way to February, Sophia gradually ventured out of the house more often, bundled in an old coat of Jackson's that swallowed her frame. She began feeding the chickens each morning, collecting eggs with careful hands that grew more confident by the day. She asked questions about the horses, standing at the paddock fence to watch as Jackson worked with them. That one seems to like you, she commented one afternoon, pointing to a chestnut mare who followed Jackson around the corral like a devoted dog. That's Daisy, Jackson explained, running a hand along the horse's neck. I raised her from a foal. She's gentle as they come. She's beautiful, Sophia said, admiration clear in her voice. Would you like to pet her? He offered. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. Jackson led Daisy to the fence, murmuring reassurances to the horse. Hold your hand flat, palm up, he instructed Sophia. Let her smell you first. With visible trepidation, Sophia extended her hand. Daisy sniffed it curiously, then nudged her palm with a velvety muzzle. A delighted laugh escaped Sophia, the first Jackson had heard from her, as the horse nibbled gently at her fingers. She likes you, Jackson observed, watching Sophia's face transform with joy. I've never been this close to a horse before, she admitted, cautiously stroking Daisy's forehead. In Chicago, I only saw them pulling carriages, always in harness and working. Horses are remarkable creatures, Jackson said, stronger than most men, but willing to work with us if we treat them with respect and kindness. Is that why you chose to raise them? She asked, still focused on Daisy. Jackson considered the question. Partly. After the war, I couldn't stomach being around too many people. Horses don't judge, don't ask questions about things you'd rather forget. They're honest in a way people rarely are. Sophia glanced at him, and he realized he'd revealed more than he intended. I understand that need for honest company, she said softly. Their eyes met over the fence, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared experience despite their different paths. The moment stretched, then broke as Daisy nudged Sophia's hand again, demanding more attention. I think she's decided you're a friend now, Jackson said with a smile. Would you like to learn to ride her? Sophia's eyes widened. Me, on a horse. Why not? Daisy's the perfect horse to learn on. She won't let you fall. I might take you up on that when there's less snow and the ground is softer, she replied with a small smile. Jackson laughed. Fair enough, but the offer stands. As February progressed, the brutal cold of deep winter began to ease, though spring remained a distant promise. Sophia's presence in the house had become so natural that Jackson found himself wondering how he'd managed the isolation before her arrival. Her quiet efficiency complemented his more methodical approach to tasks, and they developed an unspoken understanding of each other's habits and preferences. In the evenings after dinner, they often sat by the fire. Jackson would read from one of the few books he owned, while Sophia mended clothing or worked on improving an old dress she'd found in a trunk in the attic, which Jackson confirmed had belonged to his late mother. These quiet hours became precious to both of them, a peaceful interlude after days filled with work. One such evening in late February, as snow fell softly outside, Sophia broke their comfortable silence with a question. Do you ever get lonely out here so far from town? Jackson looked up from his book, considering his answer. I used to when I first settled here. Now I find I prefer the solitude to most company. He paused, then added, present company accepted, of course. Sophia smiled at that. It's different from Chicago. There you could be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Here the isolation is honest, at least. Is that how you felt in your marriage? Alone despite having company? He asked carefully, aware he was venturing into territory they'd mostly avoided since her initial explanation. Sophia set down her sewing. Yes, Richard was charming in public. Everyone thought I was fortunate to have caught the eye of such a successful man. No one saw what happened behind closed doors. She traced a pattern on the arm of her chair. The worst part wasn't the physical cruelty. It was the isolation, the way he systematically cut me off from friends, family, anyone who might have helped me see the truth sooner. Jackson felt a familiar anger stir at the thought of anyone treating her with such calculated malice. Some men aren't worthy of the name, he said, his voice low. A real man protects those in his care, he doesn't terrorize them. And what about you, Jackson Zimmerman? She asked, her gaze direct. What kind of man builds a house with rooms he doesn't use, in a place where few would choose to live alone? The question caught him off guard. A foolish one, maybe, he answered with a self-deprecating smile. I came west after the war because I couldn't face what was left of home. Too many ghosts. I ended up working cattle drives, then as a horse trainer for the army at Fort Ellis, saved every penny until I could buy this land. But why build such a large house for just yourself? Jackson stared into the fire, memories surfacing that he rarely allowed himself to examine. I was engaged once, back in Pennsylvania. Her name was Elizabeth. We had plans to marry after the war. He paused. She didn't wait. Can't blame her, really. 4 years is a long time, and the man who came back wasn't the same one who left. I'm sorry, Sophia said softly. Jackson shrugged. It was for the best. By then, I knew I needed space, quiet, but I suppose some part of me never gave up on the idea of a family. So I built a house that could hold one, even if the likelihood grew smaller with each passing year. Sophia was quiet for a moment, then said, It's a beautiful home. Whoever you built it for would have been lucky. Their eyes met across the warm space between them, and Jackson felt something shift in the air, a recognition of shared loneliness. Perhaps, or the first tentative acknowledgement of deeper feelings neither was ready to name. The moment was interrupted by a gust of wind that rattled the windows, drawing their attention back to the storm outside. Sounds like it's getting worse, Sophia observed. Will the animals be all right? They're well sheltered, Jackson assured her. I checked everything before dark. The barn is solid, built it stronger than the house, truth be told. Sophia smiled at that. Your priorities are clear, Mr. Zimmerman. A man can sleep under a blanket of snow if necessary, he replied with a grin, but horses need proper protection from the elements. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics after that, but something had changed between them, a door opened that neither could entirely close again. The following week brought the first real hint of spring's approach. The snow began to melt during daylight hours, leaving the ground muddy but manageable. Birds returned to the trees around the property, filling the morning air with song. Sophia had taken to joining Jackson for parts of his morning routine, helping with small tasks in the barn and learning the names and temperaments of all the horses. Her initial fear had given way to cautious enthusiasm, especially where Daisy was concerned. The gentle mare seemed equally taken with Sophia, nickering in greeting whenever she appeared. "I think you're ready for that riding lesson I promised," Jackson said one crisp morning as they finished feeding the horses. Sophia looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" "The ground is still quite hard if I fall." "You won't fall," he assured her. "Not with me teaching you and not on Daisy." "Well, all right," she agreed, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. Jackson saddled Daisy with extra care, explaining each step of the process to Sophia. He adjusted the stirrups to accommodate her shorter legs and chose the gentlest bit from his collection. "Now," he said, leading the horse out to the flat area beside the barn, "the first thing to remember is that horses can sense your emotions. If you're nervous, Daisy will be nervous too. Try to stay calm and confident even if you don't feel that way inside." Sophia nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll try." "Good. Now watch how I mount first, then I'll help you up." Jackson demonstrated the proper technique, then dismounted and stood beside the stirrup. "Your left foot goes here, and I'll give you a boost up. Hold the saddle horn for balance." With Jackson's strong hands supporting her waist, Sophia managed to pull herself up into the saddle. She sat rigid at first, gripping the horn with white knuckles. "Relax," Jackson advised, keeping one hand on her leg and the other on Daisy's bridle. "Sit back a bit, let your weight settle naturally. The saddle is designed to hold you securely." Gradually, Sophia's posture softened. Jackson showed her how to hold the reins properly, then began leading Daisy in a slow circle around the yard, giving instructions about posture and balance as they went. "You're doing well," he encouraged after several circuits. "Ready to try directing her yourself?" "I think so," Sophia replied, her confidence visibly growing. Jackson released the bridle but stayed close, talking Sophia through the basics of using the reins to communicate with Daisy. The mare responded beautifully to even Sophia's inexpert guidance, turning and stopping with patient obedience. After about half an hour, Jackson noticed Sophia beginning to tire. "That's enough for today," he said. "You've made excellent progress." He helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Sophia's cheeks were flushed with excitement and exertion, her eyes bright. "That was wonderful," she exclaimed. "I never imagined I could actually control such a large animal." "It's not about control so much as partnership," Jackson explained, patting Daisy's neck. "The horse agrees to carry you and you agree to treat her well and give clear directions. When it works, it's like nothing else in the world." "I can see why you love them," Sophia said, reaching out to stroke Daisy's muzzle. "Thank you for teaching me." "My pleasure," Jackson replied, and he meant it sincerely. Sharing his passion with someone who approached it with such genuine interest had been deeply satisfying. As March progressed, Sophia's riding lessons became a regular part of their routine. Her confidence grew with each session, and soon she was able to take Daisy around the property at a walk without Jackson leading them. Her joy in these small achievements was contagious, and Jackson found himself looking forward to their time together more than any other part of his day. He also began taking her into Montana City occasionally, introducing her as his housekeeper to the shopkeepers and neighbors they encountered. If anyone found the arrangement unusual, they kept their opinions to themselves. In a territory where survival often depended on mutual assistance, practical arrangements were seldom questioned. Sophia blossomed under the combination of security, purpose, and fresh air. The gaunt woman Jackson had discovered in his barn was replaced by someone with healthy color in her cheeks and strength in her slender frame. Her smiles came more readily, her laughter more frequently. The hunted look in her eyes faded, though it never entirely disappeared. For his part, Jackson found his own habits and outlook changing. The house became a home rather than merely shelter, a place he looked forward to returning to at day's end. He began making improvements he'd long neglected, fixing the squeaky step on the porch, replacing a cracked window pane, carving a proper rocking chair for the front porch where they could sit on pleasant evenings. One afternoon in late March, Jackson returned from checking fence lines to find Sophia waiting for him by the barn, unusual worry evident in her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, dismounting from his gelding. "A man came looking for you while you were gone," she said, her voice tight. "Someone from town, I think his name was Jenkins. He said there was trouble." "Frank Jenkins, the blacksmith," Sophia nodded. "He said to tell you there are strangers in town asking questions about new arrivals, especially women traveling alone. He thought you should know." Jackson felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Did he say what these men looked like? Well-dressed, Eastern accents. Not the usual type passing through Montana City. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the day wasn't particularly cold. "Jackson, I think they might be looking for me." He led his horse into the barn, considering the implications. Did Jenkins say anything else? Did these men give names or say who they were working for? No, but he said they were offering money for information. Sophia followed him into the barn, her voice low as if afraid of being overheard even here. "If they find me." "They won't," Jackson said firmly, turning to face her after removing his horse's saddle. "Frank wouldn't have sent word if he planned to tell them anything. He's a good man, served in the war too. But others might talk," she pressed. "And if they're offering rewards, Sophia," Jackson interrupted, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I won't let anyone take you. Do you understand? You're safe here." She looked up at him, fear and something else, trust, perhaps warring in her eyes. "What should we do?" "For now, nothing," he decided. "We don't know for certain they're looking for you specifically. Montana Territory sees all kinds of people passing through, but we'll be cautious. You should stay close to the house for a few days, and I'll ride into town tomorrow to see what I can learn without drawing attention." Sophia nodded, visibly trying to master her fear. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." "You have nothing to apologize for," Jackson said firmly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The word "together" hung between them, weighted with meanings neither had fully acknowledged. Jackson's hands remained on her shoulders, and he became acutely aware of her proximity, of the trust she was placing in him. Sophia's gaze dropped to his chest, then back to his face. "Together," she repeated softly, the words sounding like both a question and a promise. For a brief, electric moment, Jackson thought she might step closer, that he might bend down to close the distance between them. Instead, a whinny from one of the stalls broke the spell, and they stepped apart, the moment passing unfulfilled. "I should finish my chores," Sophia said, her voice slightly unsteady. "And I need to unsaddle Thunder," Jackson agreed, turning back to his horse. "We'll talk more at supper." That evening, their usual comfortable silence was replaced by a tension born of unspoken fears and equally unspoken feelings. They discussed practical matters, what Jackson would do in town, what precautions Sophia should take, but beneath the logistics ran a current of deeper concern. "If they are looking for me," Sophia said as they sat by the fire after dinner, "I should leave. I won't put you in danger." Jackson shook his head firmly. "Running now would only make you more vulnerable. Besides, where would you go? Another town where you know no one, another barn to hide in." "I managed before," she insisted, though without conviction. "You nearly starved," he countered. "And winter isn't entirely done with us yet. One late storm could be deadly if you're caught unprepared." Sophia gazed into the fire, her profile gilded by its light. "I'm not worth the risk, Jackson. These aren't men who give up easily, and they don't care who gets hurt in the process. Let me be the judge of what risks I'm willing to take," he said quietly. "And for whom?" She turned to look at him then, her eyes searching his face. "Why? Why would you put yourself in harm's way for someone you've known barely 2 months?" Jackson considered his answer carefully, knowing they were approaching territory that would change everything between them. "Because in those 2 months, you've brought life back to this house and to me. Because I've seen your strength and your kindness, your determination to rebuild what was taken from you." He paused, then added more softly, "Because I care what happens to you, Sophia, more than I expected to care about anyone again." Her eyes widened slightly at his words. "Jackson." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm just explaining why I won't let you face this alone." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I care about you too, and that's what frightens me most. The thought of something happening to you because of me, I couldn't bear it." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Jackson felt a surge of protectiveness alongside the warmth her words kindled in his chest. "Nothing will happen," he promised, reaching across to take her hand. "We'll be careful, and if these men are indeed looking for you, we'll figure out what to do together." Sophia's fingers tightened around his. "Together," she repeated, the word now a commitment rather than a question. They sat like that for some time, hands joined, each drawing strength from the other's presence as they contemplated the uncertainty ahead. The following morning, Jackson rode into Montana City earlier than usual, his Colt revolver tucked into his belt beneath his coat. The small town was just beginning to stir as he tied his horse outside the general store, which wouldn't open for another hour. Instead of waiting, he made his way to the blacksmith shop where Frank Jenkins was already at work, the rhythmic clanging of his hammer on hot metal audible from the street. The stocky, bearded man looked up as Jackson entered. "Figured you'd be by today," Frank greeted him, setting aside his hammer. "Your housekeeper passed along my message." "She did," Jackson confirmed. "What can you tell me about these strangers?" Frank wiped his hands on his apron. "3 of them staying at Widow Miller's boarding house. Arrived 2 days ago on the stage from Helena. Well-dressed, city men Chicago from the sound of them, though they didn't say as much. What exactly are they asking about, women traveling alone, especially any who might have arrived in the past few months? Particularly interested in someone with dark hair, mid-20s, said she might be using a different name than the one they know." Frank gave Jackson a significant look. "Sounds like someone specific they're after." Jackson kept his expression neutral. "Did they say why they're looking for this woman? Claim she's a witness in some legal matter back east, offering $50 for solid information." Frank spat into the dirt floor of his shop. "But they got the look of men who ain't telling the whole truth. One of them keeps his coat buttoned up even indoors, like he might be hiding a shoulder holster. Anyone talking to them, you know how it is, $50 is good money around here." Frank leaned closer. "Your housekeeper fit their description, Jackson." There was no point denying what Frank had obviously guessed. "She might," he admitted cautiously. "But if she's who I think they're looking for, she's not a witness, she's running for her life." The blacksmith nodded slowly. "Figured it might be something like that. She seemed proper nervous when I came by your place." He picked up a horseshoe, examining it thoughtfully. "These men have been asking specific questions about you too, whether you live alone, how far out your place is, that sort of thing." A cold anger settled in Jackson's chest. "Have they now?" "Might be they've already heard rumors about a woman staying at your place. Montana City ain't exactly big enough for secrets." "No, it isn't," Jackson agreed grimly. "Any idea how long they plan to stay?" "Paid Widow Miller for a week, from what I hear." Frank set the horseshoe down. "Look, Jackson, I fought alongside you at Gettysburg. I know what kind of man you are. If you say this woman needs protection, that's good enough for me. But these fellas don't look like the type to give up easily or to play by any rules." "I appreciate the warning, Frank, and the loyalty. Just be careful, and if you need anything." Frank let the offer hang unfinished. Jackson nodded his understanding. "I'll keep that in mind. In the meantime, if anyone asks, you haven't seen me in town today." "Never saw a soul," Frank agreed with a grim smile. Instead of completing his usual errands in town, Jackson made only a quick stop at the general store for essential supplies before heading back to the ranch. His mind worked furiously during the ride home, weighing options and planning for various contingencies. Sophia was waiting anxiously on the porch when he returned, her face pale with worry. "What did you learn?" she asked as soon as he dismounted. "Let's talk inside," he replied, leading his horse to the barn first to unsaddle him. Once they were in the kitchen, Jackson related everything Frank had told him, watching as Sophia's expression shifted from fear to resignation. "They found me," she said quietly. "I knew they would eventually." "They haven't found you yet," Jackson corrected. "They're still asking questions, which means they don't know for certain where you are. But they suspect. Why else would they be asking about you specifically? She paced the kitchen, her movements restless. I should leave, Jackson. Get as far away from here as possible before they come looking. And go where? They'd track you down again, and next time you might not find someone willing to help. Jackson placed his hands on her shoulders, stilling her nervous movement. We have some time to think this through. They're paid to find you, not to risk their lives in a confrontation. We can use that. Sophia looked unconvinced. What are you suggesting? We make it clear that coming after you isn't worth the risk, Jackson said simply. Frank Jenkins knows your situation now, and he's on our side. There are others in town who would stand with us if they knew the truth. You want to tell people about me? Sophia's voice rose in alarm. Jackson, the fewer people who know, the safer everyone is. Not the whole story, he clarified. Just enough so they understand you're in danger and these men aren't who they claim to be. Montana territory takes care of its own, Sophia. You may have arrived as a stranger, but you're one of us now. His words seemed to affect her deeply. She blinked rapidly, turning away to hide the emotions crossing her face. I don't want anyone hurt because of me, she said finally. Especially not you. Jackson gently turned her back to face him. I've faced worse odds than 3 city men with hidden pistols, he said, his voice low and confident. But I don't think it will come to that. If we make it clear they're not welcome and won't find easy prey here, they'll likely move on rather than risk a confrontation where the whole town is watching. Sophia studied his face, searching for reassurance. You really believe that? I do, he said, though privately he was prepared for less peaceful resolutions if necessary. But it would help to know exactly what we're dealing with. Can you tell me more about these men, who they work for, what they're capable of? Sophia sighed, moving to sit at the kitchen table. Jackson joined her, waiting patiently as she gathered her thoughts. They would be working for a man named Victor Hargrove, she finally said. He was Richard's business partner and the real power behind their operations. After Richard died, Hargrove was the one who made it clear I would be held responsible. She twisted her fingers together nervously. He employs several men who handle problems. I only met a few of them, but they were cold, efficient, professional in their cruelty. Did Hargrove threaten you directly? Yes. He came to see me after the funeral, said that Richard's death had cost him a great deal of money and disrupted business arrangements years in the making. He blamed me for not warning them about the federal investigation. Her voice dropped. He said he would give me time to grieve, but that eventually we would have a reckoning. That's when I knew I had to run. And you believe these men in town work for him? Sophia nodded. It fits his pattern. He wouldn't come himself too risky and beneath his dignity. But he would send men he trusts to find me and either bring me back or... She didn't finish the thought. Jackson covered her hands with one of his own. They won't touch you, he promised. Not while I'm breathing. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Sophia look up sharply. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first night in the kitchen. Jackson, she began hesitantly, I need you to know that whatever happens, these past months with you have been. She paused, searching for words. You've given me back something I thought was lost forever. Not just safety, but the belief that there are good men in this world, men who protect instead of harm, who build instead of destroy. The simple honesty of her words touched him deeply. Sophia, he said softly, you've given me just as much. This house was just a building before you came. Now it's a home again. Their hands remained joined on the table, neither willing to break the connection as they sat in companionable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Jackson made sure Sophia was never alone, bringing her with him even for tasks around the property that she would normally have remained in the house for. They kept the horses saddled and ready, prepared for quick departure if necessary. Word came through Frank Jenkins that the strangers continued their inquiries in town, growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of concrete information. The citizens of Montana City, taking their cue from Frank and a few other respected townsfolk, had closed ranks, offering vague responses or outright misinformation when questioned. On the 4th day after Jackson's visit to town, They were working together in the vegetable garden Sophia had started near the house when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Jackson straightened immediately, hand going to the revolver at his hip. "Get inside," he told Sophia quietly. "Go upstairs and watch from the bedroom window. If anything happens, take Daisy and ride for the Miller place there 3 miles east through the forest trail." Sophia hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him, but nodded and hurried into the house. Jackson moved to the front of the property, positioning himself casually by the corral fence where he had a clear view of the approaching riders. There were 3 of them, as Frank had described, well-dressed men who sat their rented horses with the stiff discomfort of those unaccustomed to riding. They slowed as they approached, taking in the neat ranch with assessing eyes. "Afternoon," Jackson called, his tone neutral but his stance alert. "Something I can help you gentlemen with." The man in the lead, a thin-faced individual with cold eyes and a precisely trimmed mustache, urged his horse forward. "Mr. Zimmerman, Jackson Zimmerman." "That's right," Jackson confirmed, not moving from his position. "My name is Howard Crane. My associates and I are looking for a woman who may have passed through this area recently. Dark hair, mid-20s, likely using an assumed name." The man's accent confirmed Frank's assessment, definitely from Chicago or thereabouts. "We understand you might have encountered such a woman." Jackson's expression remained impassive. "Lots of people pass through Montana territory. What's your interest in this particular woman?" Crane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's a witness in an important legal matter back in Illinois. Her testimony is required, and she's being quite uncooperative by hiding out here in the wilderness." "Is that so?" Jackson said, making no effort to hide his skepticism. "Must be an important case to send 3 men all this way." "Very important," Crane agreed smoothly. "So important that we're authorized to offer a substantial reward for information leading to her whereabouts. $50 to be precise." Jackson leaned against the fence post, projecting casualness he didn't feel. $50 is good money, he acknowledged. "But I'm curious, if she's just a witness, why not send a federal marshal? They have authority in the territories." A flicker of annoyance crossed Crane's face. "The legal situation is complicated, private interests are involved." "I'll bet they are," Jackson commented dryly. "Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid I can't help you. Haven't seen any woman matching that description." Crane's pretense at friendliness vanished. "Mr. Zimmerman, we have reliable information that a woman fitting our description has been living here with you for some time. Several people in town have confirmed seeing her." "Is that so?" Jackson straightened, his hand resting casually near his revolver. "Then you've been misinformed. The only woman at this ranch is my wife." The bold lie took Crane by surprise. "Your wife? Our information indicated you were unmarried." "Information can be outdated," Jackson replied evenly. "Sophia and I were married 2 months ago. Quiet ceremony in Helena. Now, unless you have other business here, I suggest you turn around and head back to town. My hospitality only extends so far when it comes to men questioning my family." The 3 exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by this unexpected development. "Perhaps we could speak with Mrs. Zimmerman," Crane suggested, a note of suspicion in his voice. "I don't think that's necessary," Jackson replied, his tone hardening. "My wife has no business with men from Chicago, especially ones who won't state their true purpose here." The youngest of the 3 men, who had remained silent until now, shifted impatiently in his saddle. "This is a waste of time, Crane. He's obviously hiding her." "Let's just be quiet, Morris," Crane snapped, then turned back to Jackson with a thin smile. "You seem very protective, Mr. Zimmerman. One might almost think you have something to hide." "One might think the same about 3 armed men who ride onto private property asking questions about a woman they refuse to name," Jackson countered. "Now, I've been polite so far, but I'm asking you to leave. Whether you do so peacefully is entirely up to you." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Crane's eyes narrowed as he reassessed the situation and the man before him. Jackson knew what the man was seeing: a hardened frontiersman comfortable with violence, on his own territory, with the tactical advantage. "Very well, Mr. Zimmerman," Crane finally said. "We'll be on our way, but this matter isn't concluded. As far as this property is concerned, it is, Jackson replied firmly. I don't expect to see you here again. Crane tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. Good day to you, sir. Please give our regards to your wife. The three men turned their horses and rode away, their stiff backs communicating their displeasure. Jackson watched until they disappeared from sight, then hurried inside to find Sophia descending the stairs, her face pale but composed. Your wife? She asked, a hint of astonishment in her voice. It seemed the simplest explanation, Jackson replied, checking that his revolver was fully loaded, and one that might make them hesitate, at least temporarily. Do you think they believed you? Not entirely, he admitted. But it complicates things for them. If you're legally married to a local resident, their story about you being a reluctant witness becomes harder to maintain. Sophia paced the room, her agitation evident. They'll be back, or they'll wait in town, try to catch me there. Probably, Jackson agreed grimly. But now we know what we're dealing with, and they've shown their hand by coming here directly. What do we do now? Jackson considered their options. We need to get word to Sheriff Mills. Frank said he's been out of town tracking horse thieves, but he should be back by now. With law enforcement involved, these men will have to be more careful. And if they aren't, Sophia asked quietly, Jackson looked at her directly. Then I'll do whatever is necessary to protect you. I meant what I said out there, Sophia. As far as I'm concerned, you are family now. The word hung between them, weighted with implications neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a flush rising to her cheeks. Family, she repeated softly, testing the word. I haven't had that in a very long time. You do now, Jackson said simply. If you want it. Their gazes held, the unspoken question in his words clear. Before Sophia could respond, however, the sound of a galloping horse approaching the house drew their attention. Jackson moved to the window, hand on his revolver, but relaxed when he recognized the rider. It's Frank Jenkins, he told Sophia, moving to open the door. The blacksmith dismounted quickly, his expression grim. Jackson, we've got trouble. Those men are planning to come back tonight with reinforcements. How do you know? Overheard them at the saloon. They've hired some of the drifters hanging around town, promised good money to help retrieve stolen property, is how they put it. Frank glanced at Sophia, who had appeared in the doorway behind Jackson. Madam, they're planning to take you by force if necessary. Sophia's face drained of color. How many men? 5 hired guns plus the 3 of them, Frank answered. They're waiting for dark. Jackson's mind raced through their options. 8 against 1 were not favorable odds, even with the home advantage. Is the sheriff back? He asked Frank. No, and his deputies down with fever. We're on our own. Frank straightened, his expression resolute. But not entirely alone. I've rallied a few men who'll stand with us, Peterson, Miller, and old Doc Williams, believe it or not. They're gathering what weapons they have and will meet us here before sundown. Jackson clasped the blacksmith's shoulder. I'm grateful, Frank. Like I said, I know what kind of man you are, Frank replied simply. And anyone can see this lady isn't stolen property to be retrieved. Whatever her story is, she deserves better than being dragged back east by hired thugs. Sophia stepped forward. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I don't know what to say. No need for thanks, madam. Montana takes care of its own. Frank turned back to Jackson. I should head back to town, keep an eye on them. We'll be here well before sunset. After Frank departed, Jackson and Sophia worked quickly to prepare for the coming confrontation. They moved valuables to safer locations, barricaded windows, and positioned furniture to create defensive positions if the house were breached. I want you to take Daisy and be ready to ride if things go badly, Jackson told Sophia as they worked. There's a hunting cabin about 10 miles north of here. It's well hidden, stocked with basic supplies. I'm not leaving you to face them alone, Sophia replied firmly. Sophia, no, Jackson, she interrupted, her expression determined. These men have taken enough from me, my home, my security, my peace of mind. I won't let them take you too. We face this together. The fierce conviction in her voice made argument impossible. Instead, Jackson showed her how to load and fire the spare shotgun, positioning her where she would have cover, but also a clear line of fire if needed. As the afternoon waned, Frank returned with their reinforcements, 4 determined men who positioned themselves strategically around the property. The atmosphere was tense, but focused as they waited for the approaching confrontation. Twilight descended, the landscape gradually surrendering its colors to the encroaching darkness. Jackson moved between positions, checking on his improvised defense force, then returned to the house where Sophia waited. "They'll be coming soon," he said, loading extra cartridges into his belt. Sophia stood near the window, her face composed but her knuckles white where she gripped the shotgun. "I never wanted this," she said quietly, "never wanted to bring violence to your home." "This isn't your doing," Jackson replied, moving to stand beside her. "The responsibility lies with the men who refuse to let you live in peace." She turned to face him, her eyes luminous in the fading light. "Jackson, if something happens tonight, nothing's going to happen," he interrupted gently. "Please let me speak," she insisted. "If something happens, I need you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my adult life. That you've shown me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness." She took a shaky breath. "That I've grown to care for you in ways I never expected to feel again." The simple declaration, spoken without embellishment, moved him deeply. Jackson reached out, gently touching her cheek. "Sophia," he said softly, "when this is over, when you're truly safe, we'll have time to talk about all that might be between us. But know this, my feelings for you run just as deep, and have from almost the moment you came into my life." Their eyes held, the world narrowing to just the two of them in that moment of quiet truth. Then a sharp whistle from outside the agreed-upon signal brought them back to reality. "They're coming," Jackson said, moving away from the window. "Stay low and remember what I showed you." The sound of horses approaching reached them, more than could be accounted for by Crane and his men alone. Jackson positioned himself near the front door, rifle ready, as shadowy figures materialized from the darkness. "Zimmerman," Crane's voice called out, "we know you're in there. Send out the woman and we'll leave peacefully. Resist, and things will go badly for everyone." "The woman you're looking for isn't here," Jackson replied loudly. "Just my wife and myself, protected by friends who take a dim view of nighttime visitors with threats on their lips." "We're done playing games," Crane responded, his tone hardening. "You have 1 minute to produce Sophia Calloway, or we're coming in to find her ourselves." Inside the house, Sophia moved to Jackson's side. "Let me speak to them," she whispered. "Absolutely not," he replied firmly. "They want you vulnerable and exposed. They're going to attack anyway," she argued. "Maybe I can buy us time or learn something useful." Jackson considered her words, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind me and don't move past the doorway." He opened the door partially, keeping Sophia shielded behind his larger frame. In the yard, 8 mounted men were arrayed in a semicircle, their features indistinct in the gathering darkness. Lanterns hanging from saddle horns cast eerie, shifting light across the scene. "I'm here, Mr. Crane," Sophia called, her voice remarkably steady. "What exactly does Victor Hargrove want with me? To silence me permanently or merely to make an example of me?" Her direct question seemed to catch Crane off guard. "Miss Calloway," he replied after a moment, "Mr. Hargrove merely wishes to speak with you regarding certain business matters left unresolved by your late husband's unfortunate demise." "We both know that's a lie," Sophia responded. "Richard left nothing unresolved. He made sure of that when he tried to kill those federal agents. What Hargrove really fears is that I know too much about his operations, about the bribes, the extortion, the men who disappeared after opposing him." Jackson felt a surge of admiration for her courage, even as he tensed for the inevitable violent response her words would provoke. "You're making serious accusations about a respected businessman," Crane said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Accusations that could be considered slanderous." "Not if they're true," Sophia countered. "And we both know they are, which is why you're here with hired guns instead of legal papers. Victor Hargrove doesn't want justice, he wants silence." One of the hired men shifted impatiently. "Enough talk, Crane. Let's take her and be done with it." Crane raised a hand to silence him, his focus still on Sophia. "Miss Calloway, you're in a territory with minimal law enforcement, surrounded by men who are paid very well to ensure your cooperation. Your position is untenable." Come with us peacefully, and I give you my word you won't be harmed during the journey east. And once we reach Chicago, Sophia asked pointedly. What then? Crane's silence was answer enough. I thought so, Sophia said grimly. Well, Mr. Crane, you should know that you're also surrounded. My husband's friends take a dim view of threats against women, especially from Eastern men with questionable motives. As if on cue, Frank Jenkins and the other defenders stepped out from their concealed positions, weapons raised and ready. The sudden appearance of armed men on all sides created an instant shift in the atmosphere. You're outgunned, Crane, Jackson called out. Take your men and ride out now while you still can. Crane's expression hardened as he assessed the new threat. This changes nothing. We'll be back with more men. No, you won't, interrupted a new voice as another rider emerged from the darkness. The unmistakable glint of a sheriff's badge caught the lantern light. Because you'll be in my jail for attempted kidnapping and trespassing. Sheriff Mills rode into the circle of light, his Winchester repeating rifle held casually but ready. Frank sent word to me at the Henderson place where I was tracking those horse thieves. Got here just in time, it seems. The arrival of law enforcement visibly deflated Crane and his companions. The hired guns, in particular, seemed suddenly less enthusiastic about their employment. Sheriff, Crane began smoothly, there's been a misunderstanding. We're merely attempting to escort this woman back to Chicago where she's needed as a witness in Save It for the Judge, Mills interrupted. I've already telegraphed the federal marshal in Helena about your activities here. Seems Miss Calloway isn't the only one being sought by authorities. Your employer, Mr. Hargrove, is under investigation by federal agents. They're quite interested in speaking with his associates. This news clearly shocked Crane, whose composed demeanor cracked visibly. That's impossible, he sputtered. Hargrove has protection in Chicago, not anymore he doesn't, Mills replied. Now, all of you hands where I can see them. You're coming with me to Montana City, until the federal boys can get here. What followed was a tense but orderly disarmament of Crane and his men, with Sheriff Mills and Frank Jenkins overseeing the process, while Jackson remained at Sophia's side, ready to defend her if anyone made a desperate move. None did. The confrontation had shifted too decisively against them, and one by one, they surrendered their weapons and accepted temporary arrest. The hired guns, seeing no profit in further resistance, were particularly quick to comply. As Sheriff Mills and the others prepared to escort the prisoners to town, he approached Jackson and Sophia on the porch. Madam, he said, tipping his hat to Sophia, you should know that the telegraph I received mentioned you specifically. The federal agents want to speak with you too, but as a witness, not a suspect. Seems your testimony could help dismantle Hargrove's entire operation. Sophia's eyes widened. They want my help. Yes, madam, and they're offering protection in exchange. Real protection, with federal authority behind it. Mills glanced between her and Jackson. Of course, that would mean traveling to Chicago eventually to testify. Jackson felt something cold settle in his stomach at the thought of Sophia leaving, but he kept his expression neutral. This was her decision to make. I'll need to think about it, Sophia said, glancing at Jackson. To discuss it with Jackson, Mills nodded understandingly. No rush on a decision, the marshal won't be here for at least 3 days. In the meantime, these fellows will be enjoying Montana City's finest accommodations, meaning my jail. He tipped his hat again. Good night to you both. Fine job standing your ground, Zimmerman. As the impromptu posse departed with their prisoners, Frank lingered behind for a moment. You two all right? He asked gruffly. We are now, Jackson replied, extending his hand. Thanks to you and the others, I won't forget this, Frank. The blacksmith clasped his hand firmly. No need for thanks between friends, besides gives us all a good story to tell around the saloon. His eyes twinkled with humor. Particularly that part about your wife standing up to those city slickers. Quite a woman you've got there, Jackson. Jackson glanced at Sophia, who was watching them with a small smile. Yes, she is, he agreed quietly. After Frank departed, Jackson and Sophia stood on the porch watching until the lanterns of the departing group had disappeared into the darkness. The night was peaceful again, filled only with the familiar sounds of the Montana wilderness. "It's over," Sophia said softly, as if hardly daring to believe it. "Really over." "It seems so," Jackson agreed, turning to look at her. The moonlight silvered her features, highlighting the mixture of relief and uncertainty in her expression. "What will you do about the federal agent's offer?" Sophia sighed, wrapping her arms around herself against the night's chill. "I don't know. The thought of going back to Chicago, of facing Hargrove and his organization in court," she shuddered slightly. "But if my testimony could help bring him to justice, prevent him from hurting others." "You'd have protection," Jackson reminded her. "And you wouldn't be alone. I'd go with you if you wanted." She looked up at him, surprise evident in her face. "You would leave your ranch, your horses, everything you've built here, for a while, yes," he said simply. "The horses can be looked after. Frank would help arrange it. What matters is making sure you're safe, and if that means escorting you to Chicago and back, then that's what I'll do." Sophia's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "Why, Jackson, why would you do that for me?" It was time for complete honesty. Jackson took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "Because in these past months, you've become more important to me than this land, these buildings, even the horses I've raised. Because I can't imagine this place without you in it anymore." He paused, gathering courage. "Because I love you, Sophia. I think I have almost from the beginning." The declaration hung in the night air between them, honest and vulnerable. For a moment, Sophia seemed too stunned to respond, her lips parted in surprise. "You love me," she whispered finally. "Yes," he confirmed simply. "I understand if you don't feel the same or if you need time. After everything you've been through," his words were cut off as Sophia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that started tentative but quickly deepened with shared emotion. Jackson's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as years of loneliness and months of unspoken feelings found expression in that single, perfect moment. When they finally parted, Sophia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," she said softly. "I've been afraid to admit it, afraid to trust these feelings after everything that happened with Richard. But tonight, when I thought I might lose you," she shook her head slightly. "I can't imagine a life without you either, Jackson Zimmerman." Jackson smiled, tenderly brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then whatever comes next, we face it together. Whether that means staying here or temporarily going east, building a future here or somewhere else entirely." "Together," Sophia agreed, leaning into his embrace. "I like the sound of that." They stood there on the porch of the house Jackson had built, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead, and the future stretched before them, uncertain in its details, but secure in its foundation of love and trust, hard-won through trial and adversity. The following days brought a flurry of activity as federal marshals arrived in Montana City to take custody of Crane and his associates. Sophia spent hours with the lead marshal, providing detailed statements about Hargrove's operations based on what she had witnessed during her marriage to Richard. "Your testimony is invaluable, Mrs. Calloway," Marshal Bennett told her at the conclusion of their interviews. "With your help, we can finally build a case strong enough to bring Hargrove to justice. When would I need to travel to Chicago?" Sophia asked, glancing at Jackson, who sat supportively by her side throughout the proceedings. "Not for several months at least," Bennett replied. "We need to gather additional evidence, coordinate with the Chicago authorities. When the time comes, we'll provide an armed escort for your journey and protection throughout your stay." The knowledge that she had time to prepare, time with Jackson before any difficult journey, eased Sophia's anxiety considerably. As spring fully blossomed across the Montana landscape, life at the ranch settled back into a rhythm, albeit one transformed by the new understanding between Jackson and Sophia. They worked side by side during the days, their partnership extending to all aspects of ranch life. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch Jackson had built, watching the sunset and making plans for their future. It was on such an evening in late May, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and new foals frolicking in the pasture, that Jackson took Sophia's hand as they sat together. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, the lightheartedness that had emerged since Crane's departure now a regular feature of her personality. Jackson smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I've been thinking that Frank Jenkins and the others still believe you're my wife. Maybe we should make that true before you have to travel east." Sophia's breath caught. "Jackson Zimmerman, is that a proposal?" "Not a very romantic one, I'm afraid," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Let me try again." He slid from the rocking chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Sophia Calloway, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought light and joy back into my life, made this house a true home. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not just in name this time, but in truth?" Tears of happiness spilled onto Sophia's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would be honored to be your wife, Jackson." He rose, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. When they parted, both were smiling with the simple joy of finding, against all odds, the love they had each thought beyond their reach. They were married 2 weeks later in Montana City's small church, with Frank Jenkins standing as Jackson's best man and the schoolteacher, Miss Harper, attending Sophia. The entire community turned out to celebrate, the story of their unusual beginning having become something of a local legend. "Never thought I'd see the day Jackson Zimmerman took a bride," Frank commented at the modest reception afterward. "You've worked a miracle, Mrs. Zimmerman." "The miracle was his," Sophia replied, watching her husband across the room where he was accepting congratulations from Sheriff Mills. "He found me at my lowest point and saw something worth saving." "That's Jackson," Frank agreed. "Always had a soft spot for strays in need, horses, dogs, even people, but I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." When July came, they traveled together to Chicago under the protection of Marshal Bennett and his deputies. The journey was long but uneventful, and Sophia drew strength from Jackson's steady presence at her side. The city had once represented fear and painful memories for her, but returning as Sophia Zimmerman, with her husband's unwavering support, she found she could face her past with newfound courage. The trial was difficult but cathartic. Sophia testified clearly and confidently about what she had witnessed during her first marriage, her testimony proving crucial in securing convictions against Victor Hargrove and several of his associates. Jackson sat in the courtroom each day, his proud gaze giving her strength when painful memories threatened to overwhelm her. When it was finally over, they stood together on the platform of Chicago's Union Station, preparing to board the train that would begin their journey home to Montana. "Are you all right?" Jackson asked, noticing Sophia's contemplative expression as she looked out over the city skyline. "Yes," she replied thoughtfully. "Better than all right, actually. I feel free, truly free for the first time in years." She turned to him, her eyes clear and bright. "Thank you for coming with me, for standing by me through all of this." "Always," he promised, lifting her hand to his lips. "Ready to go home, home." The word held such different associations now than it had a year ago. No longer a place of fear or mere shelter, but a true sanctuary built on love and mutual respect. "More than ready," Sophia answered with a smile, stepping into his embrace as the train's whistle announced their imminent departure. They returned to Montana in early autumn, the journey seeming shorter with the burden of fear permanently lifted from Sophia's shoulders. The ranch welcomed them back, Frank and a few others having kept everything in good order during their absence. Life settled into a new normalcy, one filled with shared labor, laughter, and love. Sophia's riding skills improved to the point where she could accompany Jackson on rounds of the property, and her garden flourished under her attentive care. Jackson expanded his horse breeding operation, his reputation for quality animals spreading throughout the territory and beyond. As winter approached again, Sophia discovered she was expecting their first child, news that filled Jackson with a joy so profound he was momentarily rendered speechless. That night, he held her close in the master bedroom that had once been her sanctuary and was now their shared haven. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "When I built this house, I had almost given up on the dream of family, of children running through these rooms. And I had given up on the idea of safety, of love, Sophia replied, covering his hand with her own. It's strange, isn't it, how finding each other changed everything. Not strange, Jackson corrected softly. Miraculous. The following June, as summer bloomed across Montana territory, their son was born, a healthy boy with his father's strong features and his mother's dark hair, whom they named Thomas Frank Zimmerman in honor of Jackson's father and their steadfast friend. 3 years later, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth Sophia Zimmerman, named for the women who had shaped both their lives in different ways. The house that Jackson had built filled with the sounds of children's laughter, of family gatherings, of a life richer and more fulfilling than either had dared to imagine. On the 10th anniversary of the night Jackson discovered Sophia in his barn, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play with the foals in the early evening light. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? Sophia asked, her head resting comfortably on her husband's shoulder. If you hadn't discovered me that night, or if you'd decided to turn me over to the sheriff, Jackson considered the question, his arm tightening around her waist. Sometimes, he admitted. But then I look at what we've built together, this home, our children, our life, and I can't imagine any other path that could have led to such happiness. Sophia smiled, turning her face up to his. Nor can I. Who would have thought that hiding in a stranger's barn would lead to everything I never knew I wanted? I knew from the moment I saw you, terrified but defiant, hungry but proud, that you were someone special, Jackson confessed. Though I never could have predicted just how completely you would change my life. For the better, I hope, she teased gently. In every way possible, he assured her, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness that had characterized their love from the beginning, a love born in unusual circumstances, but nurtured through mutual respect, shared hardship, and unwavering commitment. As twilight settled over the Montana landscape, they both called home. Jackson and Sophia Zimmerman sat contentedly in the life they had built together, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their love and the promise of many more years to come. From unlikely beginnings, a desperate woman seeking shelter, a lonely man offering sanctuary, had grown a love story as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them.